Hello, and welcome to the Art Guy channel. I'm your host, Patrick Cabry, and I'm here because I heard that young, good-looking artists can go onto YouTube and hoard their talents into cash. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, guys, so a little bit more in depth about me and my history. In 2014, I graduated from West Chester University of Pennsylvania with a bachelor's degree in fine art, a minor in art history. I was a gallery intern, I was a bronze monument artist intern, I was a carpenter, I was all kind of things during that time. So I learned a lot of processes. In 2017, I graduated with a master's degree in all things fine art, apparently, because it's a very broad, generalized degree. And since 2017, I've been a teacher at Rutgers University, some place that you guys may have heard of once or twice. It's been in all the papers. No, that was my humble brag, my one and only humble brag. But anyway, so I just would like to share and build a platform for all of you guys to be able to share what I've learned along my journey in crafts and processes and material, and just put that all into one nice little neat little bow and just project that out for the whole world to view. So since this is our very first episode of The Art Guy, I'd like to just give you guys a little info in art history, a little lesson. There's been a very long-standing tradition for the artist to create a self-portrait. And most of the time I see a lot of drawings and paintings. You've got artists like Rembrandt, Caravaggio, Van Gogh, just some famous painters that I could think of that have created self-portraits over the different generations of artists. But I don't really know many sculptors that have created a lot of self-portraits. So for the very first episode, I'd like to pay homage to art history, in a sense, to previous artists that have come before me. And I'm going to do a self-portrait. All right, so before we jump into this, the last thing that I'd like to do is give you a little idea as to what kind of materials or things that you might need for those of you that are following along at home that want to try this out. So in ceramics, you would use either a piece of plywood or some kind of flat surface that most would call a bat. This is just a piece of foam core that you can pick up at your local box store, slice it down into smaller pieces. You might find that you want a big sheet of this to be able to slice it up and use it for different projects. I'll show you later on in the second half of this, or second part of this, what you might need more of this stuff for. So that is your flat working surface, what you're going to actually create the relief sculpture on. Then you're going to need some kind of clay. So what I'm using is a plasticine or plastilina. This is just a oil-based modeling clay that you could pick up at your local Michaels or craft store. This brand here is called Craft Smart. Apparently they only had poop flavored, and by flavored I mean don't eat this, don't actually stick it in your mouth at all, it's disgusting. It's a poop color, but it is nonetheless oil-based clay, does not harden, so that way it can remain workable for a long extended period of time. And then you're going to need lastly some kind of clay tools. I've got different wood tools, rib tools, things that I've kind of modded out myself, put some ridges on here, and then just some finer detail like tools. I've got a whole cup full of these. You can get, again, this from your local craft store. Okay, so I forgot one first step that we have to do actually is leave our workspace and go ahead and print out the picture or whatever content we're actually working from. In this case, it is a picture of myself. And here, down here, we've got Kat. She's one of my helpers. Her name's Kat, by the way. She's a Maine Coon mix. One of my studio assistant helpers. But I'm going to go ahead and print this out. That way I can work from a photo instead of from a mirror. And in most cases, you're going to want to work from life or from a model, but I don't have that. I don't even have a mirror, I don't think. So we're going to go ahead and print out a picture. Printing, 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 printing. That's the sound of the printer working, I think, I hope. What do you think, Kat? Oh, it's color too. How fancy. It's gonna be very dark. That is one handsome son of a bitch. Oh, and it got blurry. Perfect. Looks just like me. Nonetheless, it'll do. All right, let's get started. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the moment you've all been waiting for. This is how we do it. All right, so what I'm going to try to do is guide you through this the best that I can with the knowledge that I have while I'm working here in sped up motion. So if you notice, what I'm doing here is I'm just building up layers. And don't worry, I'm going to show you this process again from a different angle, and I'm going to show you a couple of different angles. But I'm just building up volume, building up layers, and I'm starting with that nose first. If you look at the face from a profile view, that thing is what is projecting forward toward you as the viewer the very most. So that is what's sticking out the most. You know that that is your outermost or toward you the most, and you're going to build back from there with volume. And I'm not worrying so much about things like surface texture or, how the thing looks, finished wise right now. What I'm doing is I'm just mapping out terrain. When you think of this kind of like a topographical map, right? It's a landscape. We're all basically landscapes. We're just looking at where things pull from. So thinking about those facets and planes, where things connect, looking at where peaks are, looking at where valleys are. So if you notice, the peak of the nose, the peak of the brow, the peak of those lips pursing out, the peak of, you've got my ear poking out at the side, the hair. So things are going to go back in space where they are receding in space and come toward you as the viewer as you're working. And I want you to think about proportions while you're mapping this out too. I don't necessarily need to draw out proportions or where things go necessarily anymore because I've drawn so many faces. But what I did do is I made this a little bit too large. So you'll take notice that the head is cut off at the top. I'm going to go ahead and add a piece of foam to that later on in this video. Now this view here is after the first hour of progress, the very first night that I worked on this. That is my cactus garden. And if you look here, this is the next day. When I walked in on it, I saw that the sunlight was coming through the window. And you want to be careful if you're working by a window like me because you get a little bit of poop on your finger there like that. I'm just going to wipe that off here. It's like disgusting. It's like diarrhea. So anyway, what I was trying to say before I rudely interrupted myself is that this plastilina or any kind of oil-based clay, it reacts to heat by melting. So it is helpful in some cases, like if you want to use a heat gun or if you want to do, a hair dryer is probably a little more acceptable to kind of carefully rework the texture or make it a little softer. You could do that. If you ball it up in your hand and you smush it together real hard, it will become more workable and pliable. But it's good for some things. It's bad if you leave it in the window because it'll melt your project. So be careful and cautious around heat with these. You see here that I went ahead and I put a couple of dowels into the styrofoam that I was working on, and then I stuck a new piece of styrofoam on top of that. And then I'm not so worried about it coming apart because the top I'm going to use a fair amount of clay for the hair, and then on the sides I'm going to work clay all the way around this thing and kind of bond it together with clay. But you do want to be careful that you don't bend your sculpture by combining this foam core together. Now, I'm sure there's quite a few of you out there that are going to take notice of the fact that it took me quite a while to start working on the eye details. Now, the important thing is that you don't get too caught up with the detail and working piecemeal. You want to make sure you get those proportions right, making sure that they're the same size, they're to scale properly very first before you start adding too much detail. So I went through and built up volume around the one eye, then I'll go through and I'm avoiding it again. And there's a lot of Instagrammers out there that I'm sure are just obsessed with eyes and see all the colored pencil pictures, the paintings and drawings. But anyway, eyes. Pay attention to them. Here's a message from our sponsors.
Meow 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 meow.
Alright, thank you Cat and Bird for that very important and beautiful message. So right now what I'm doing is I'm going back in with that smaller little fine detail tool that I showed you in the very beginning of this video. I'm going in, I'm just kind of working out, drawing the details in, mapping out that terrain, just, you know, focusing on all the surface texture, building up some volume in that hair. I'm going to go ahead and build a little bit of texture all the way around this thing so that way it's not just kind of floating in space. And then I'm going to go and drag a rake, kind of like a rake tool across everything just to give it a little kind of fleshiness. So as we wind down here sort of toward a finish line, you'll see that I use smaller and smaller tools, little point tools, just to get in there and get those real deep cuts around things like that collar, around the corners of the mouth, the nostrils, in the eyelids, around the hair. I'm just going over, I'm reworking the surface texture and picking up all those little crumbs of material and I'm just smoothing things out, but I'm also keeping some texture. Don't be afraid to leave texture in there because it gives it a more lifelike appearance, right? We're not machines, we're making things by hand. We want that human hand kind of inherently involved in this process. It's what makes us different. So it makes all of the work different, right? It stands it apart from other people's and other machines. In the next video, we're going to tackle how to make a mold of this and then how to cast it into a more permanent material. So I'm probably going to use plaster and then I'll go over that with some kind of coating to make it even more permanent and make it a little bit nicer of an appearance than just a plaster cast. So stay tuned, subscribe, hit the bell, like, do whatever the heck it is you guys do on here. Leave comments, suggestions, maybe things that I missed or left out, things that you would like to see in the future. Oh, last thing real quick guys, the giveaway. So if you are within the first 1,000 subscribers, there's going to be a lottery that you're automatically put into, and I'm going to draw 2 lucky winners to receive original casts of this actual bust that I created for this video, the finished product in the next video. You could win one of 2 of those, and 1 lucky winner will win their very own personal custom portrait of themselves. So hit that subscribe button because there's going to be all kind of cool content for you guys in the coming weeks.